that I kind of cash in or bank as much as I can. So then Ramadan comes, we try to do as many good deeds as we can, which is all very good. But then inevitably, if we approach it with that mentality, then number one, it's going to lead to some fatigue. At the end of Ramadan, or towards the middle, whatever it is, we'll think that, well, I already did do a lot, and Eid is coming up, I'm a little bit tired, and I already did a lot, so maybe I don't need to do so much more. Inevitably, for every human being, fatigue sets in. But then beyond that, if we approach it with this mentality of quantification of reward, just trying to get as much reward as we can, then naturally when Ramadan passes, then we're not going to really exert ourselves at all, because we see that we're just trying to bank or get as many rewards as we can within that time period, and we don't necessarily try to do anything more than that, because naturally the deeds are not multiplied outside of that time period of Ramadan. So this hadith perhaps is suggesting to us to maybe shift our paradigm, that Ramadan is not merely about quantification of reward. So if we look at it, we see that every single deed is multiplied from 10 to 700, except for Ramadan, except for fasting, because fasting is just not even in that conversation. So perhaps what Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam is indicating to us is that we have to sort of get out of that mentality of just trying to maximize a reward and just merely thinking of things in terms of the amount of compensation, the amount of reward that we'll get. But then that may sound weird, because then we'll think that if we don't think about something in terms of quantification of reward, how much reward we'll get, then how are we supposed to think about it? Well, then perhaps with the hadith, the answer is in the hadith. Because it says, فَإِنَّهُ لِي وَأَنَا أَجْزِي بِهِ. Ramadan is for me, or fasting is for me. So perhaps the niyyah, the intention that we have in our Ramadan, is not merely just to get reward, but rather فَإِنَّهُ لِي, rather to establish that relationship with Allah Ta'ala. And then if we think about it from that angle, that Ramadan is not just about trying to maximize our reward, but Ramadan is about establishing a connection with Allah, then we'd understand that the best way to do that is by starting early. And if we have a head start, then that's the best way to capitalize on Ramadan. Let's say that there's two people that are called for an interview for a job. And then now, maybe me or you, one of us, were there. And then there's another candidate. We're sitting in the waiting room, and then we're waiting, and then we're nervous, we're looking at the other candidate, we're trying to sort of weigh ourselves against him, thinking that is he more qualified than me, or am I more qualified? Then when the interviewer comes out, it seems like they've known each other for 10 years. And then we say, hey, that's not fair. He has a head start. He knew the person who's interviewing, and it seems like they're already friends. That's not fair for me. But let's think about it. So the advantage that that person had is that he had prior connection to the interviewer, or prior connection to whoever the manager or supervisor is, the boss who's conducting the interview. So then he's able to sort of make strides much faster. Similarly, we might think that in Ramadan, remember, it's not merely about quantification of reward, about assessing how much reward we're going to get. It's about establishing a connection with Allah Ta'ala. And if we try to establish that connection beforehand, not just on day 1 of Ramadan or day 27 of Ramadan for that matter, but rather 2 weeks before. And then we utilize the opportunity that Allah has given us to establish that connection beforehand. Then, of course, inshallah, we hope, may Allah give us tawfiq, that when Ramadan finally comes around, inshallah, then we'll be able to just be, inshallah, sailing smoothly, because we've already sought to establish that connection, inshallah. So with that stated, this is the motivation for our whole discussion, that we don't want to sort of see this chart again and again. And the way that we do that is by kind of changing our mentality, that these special seasons of the mercy of Allah Ta'ala, it's not just about gaining reward in that particular time. Of course, not to get me wrong, that is definitely part of it. We do hope for the reward from Allah Ta'ala, but that's not the extent of it. It's about establishing a connection with Allah Ta'ala. And then if we change our mentality, and we take advantage of the opportunities that Allah has given us, then we hope that instead of this, it'll just be a line that continues to go upwards, inshaAllah ta'ala. So with that stated, let's talk about the opportunities that Allah has given us. So this is a hadith in a book called Mu'jam al-Kabir of Imam Tabarani. قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم افعلوا الخير دهركم وتعرضوا لنفحات رحمة الله فإن لله نفحات من رحمته يصيب بها من يشاء من عباده. So Anas ibn Malik radiallahu anhu narrates that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, do good throughout your life. So we're supposed to do good throughout the whole year. However, we do that, but then we understand that there's special moments of the mercy of Allah Ta'ala. And those are the moments that we have to try to capitalize on. For Allah has special moments of mercy, and He bestows them upon whomsoever He wills from His servants. يُصِيبُ بِهَا مَن يَشَاءُ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ وَصَلُوا اللَّهَ أَن يَسْتُرَ عُرَاتِكُمْ وَأَن يُؤَمِّنَ رُعَاتِكُمْ. And it specifically says that we ask Allah Ta'ala to conceal our faults and to grant us safety and security. So what this is saying is that there's special seasons of mercy of Allah. But it's prefaced by first saying that we try to do good all throughout our lives, but then we capitalize on those moments. We can think about it like this, that there's one day of the year that everybody, if they maybe have to make any major purchase, then they'll try to wait till that day, especially if it's not too far away. That one day is, anyone can say it, Black Friday, right? If we have to purchase a washing machine, a new laptop, whatever it is, then we think that, okay, let me just see if there's any good sales on Black Friday. So everyone will want to capitalize on that day. Now, everyone knows because things go on sale. They sell for something much less than what they're normally priced at. So then now we want to capitalize on that. Then after Black Friday, there's Giving Tuesday. Every non-profit, every masjid, every madrasa, every school will reach out to their donor base, reach out to the musallis and say, this is Giving Tuesday, please give something. And why do non-profits do that? Because they know that there are certain times that people, for whatever reason, I guess maybe after feeling guilty about spending so much the Friday before, they want to give more charity. Maybe that's the reason, whatever it is. So then they want to capitalize on that. So just like there are times where stores are willing to give more, or let's say people are willing to donate more, similarly, there are certain seasons of mercy where Allah Ta'ala gives more. He forgives more. He bestows more upon His slaves. And then one of those days, one of those nights is this very special night that we're in right now. So now what we'll do in the next few minutes that we have, and we don't want to take too much time, because really this isn't a night of a lot of speaking, it's more a night of doing. So we'll just briefly get an idea of the virtue of this night, some of the background, and then from there, inshallah, then we hope that Allah Ta'ala will allow all of us to take advantage of the remainder of the night. So now, regarding the 15th of Sha'ban, just to put it in perspective, there's over 20 hadith on the topic from 20 different companions. So there is an abundance of narrations on this topic. Now, we won't go into the technicalities, but skipping some of the narrations for a moment. So what we'll hear about many of the narrations, that on many of the riwayat, the narrations are weak. So in order to just put this into perspective before we even mention any narrations, we have to understand that, first of all, some of the narrations definitely are weak. Some of them are even fabricated, they're mawdu'. There's some of them that are very severely weak, some of them are only slightly weak. And some of them are a little bit beyond that, they're hasan, which means that they're pretty decent, they're not bad. And then the principle amongst the scholars of hadith is that when you have many weak narrations together, then you look at it. You see what type of weakness it is. So there's one type of weakness, one type of du'af that's a severe weakness. So that's caused when somebody is a fabricator of a hadith or a liar. We can imagine if there's one liar and then there's many other liars who are there and they all say the same thing, does that convince anybody anymore? It's not going to convince them because the near possibility is that maybe all of them are lying. But then if there's something not like that, maybe it's not a matter of somebody lying. It's somebody who just, maybe he's not the best at remembering things. He's okay, but he sometimes makes mistakes. But let's say there's many people like that who are all saying the same thing. Then what may it lead the audience to think? Well, I mean, are all of them making the same mistake independently, simultaneously? That doesn't seem likely. It seems more likely that maybe there's something to it. So in short, there's two types of weakness. One is a severe weakness, which is caused by somebody being a liar, a kadhab. So with that, even if there's many of them, it does not help the narration. But there's a light weakness by somebody who has maybe just some problem remembering things. Sometimes they make mistakes. And if there's a lot of those narrations, then it definitely does help it, and then the narrations will cease to be weak. In reality, we'll call them maybe hasan. We'll say that they're okay, they're not too bad. So that's the status of these narrations. That if we put the narrations together, we see that it definitely has some basis to it. And this is what pretty much almost all the classical scholars say. But just for perspective, even scholars who are, you can say, generally opposed to things like this, even scholars like that have to admit that there must be some virtue to this night. So one of them, a person by the name of Nasruddin Albani, he says that do not pay attention to those who say that there is no virtue to this night. In other words, there's so many narrations on this topic that there definitely must be some virtue to this night. And in general, many people may not consider him to be an authority in hadith, but that's fine. We're saying for those who do, and those who know his extensive criticism, and those people of his same views, they'll say that even he is saying it, that there must be some virtue to this night. Another person, for those who consider him to be an authority, Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah, he says that there's so many narrations on this topic, the 15th of Sha'ban, that it dictates that there must be some sort of virtue to it. It must be a night of virtue. And this is just people who are just a little bit more, maybe not accepted in all circles. But then if we talk about classical scholars, then pretty much there's ittifaq across the board that all of them say that there definitely is some virtue to this night. So now that we put this into perspective, that there is over 20 Sahaba who narrate it, radiyallahu anhum. The narrations are weak, many of them, but then we see that they elevate. We see that this is even what the scholars say about it. So now let's take a brief look at some of the narrations. So what we'll do is we'll briefly look at a few of the narrations, then we'll talk a little bit about the month as a whole, some of the significance to it, not very long though, and then finally we'll just briefly talk about a brief format for what to do, inshallah. So just one or two of the narrations. So this narration is narrated by Sayyidah Aisha radiyallahu anha. It's in Imam Tirmidhi's book of hadith and also Imam Ahmad, Musnad Ahmad, that book of hadith as well. She says that there was one night that she didn't find the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. فقدت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم ذات ليلة فخرجت فإذا هو بالبقيع رافع رأسه إلى السماء. So I looked for him, and then I saw that he was raising his head towards the sky. فقال لي أكنت تخافين أن يحيف الله عليك ورسوله. Did you think that قالت قلت يا رسول الله ظننت أنك أتيت بعض نسائك. So Sayyidah Aisha radiyallahu anha was with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He suddenly got up and left. And then she thought that maybe he went to one of his other wives. She said, well, it's my turn tonight. There shouldn't be any other wife that's with him, so let me go find him. And she found that he was actually in Baqiya. He was in the cemetery. Then he was praying. He was making dua. And then he told her, إِنَّ اللَّهَ عَزَّ وَجَلْ يَنْزِلُ لَيْلَةَ النِّصْفِ مِنْ شَعْبَانِ إِلَى السَّمَاءِ الدُّنْيَا. Allah Ta'ala descends on the night of the 15th of Sha'ban to the nearest heaven. فَيَغْفِرُ لِأَكْثَرَ مِنْ عَدَدِ شَعْرِ غَنَمِ كَلْبٍ. Allah Ta'ala forgives more people than the wool in the coats of the sheep of this tribe, the tribe of Kalb. And this was a tribe that was known to have a lot of sheep. They had more sheep than any other tribe. So what it says is that Allah Ta'ala forgives more people than the hairs on the sheep of this tribe. So this is one narration. Very similar narration over here. We won't read the whole thing. But Sayyidah Aisha radiyallahu anha saw the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam praying. He was performing salah for so long. فَأَطَالَ السُّجُودِ حَتَّى ظَنَنْتُ أَنَّهُ قَدْ قُبِضَ. Sayyidah Aisha radiyallahu anha thought that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam had actually returned back to Allah Ta'ala while in sujood. Then afterwards, she asked him about it, and he said that no, this is the 15th of Sha'ban. Do you know which night this is? This is the night of Sha'ban, the 15th of Sha'ban. And he said, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Allah Ta'ala looks at his servants on this night. إن الله عز وجل يطلع على عباده في ليلة النصف من شعبان فيغفر للمستغفرين. Allah forgives anybody who's seeking forgiveness, and Allah has mercy on those who seek mercy. So now we understand that this is a very special night. Allah Ta'ala seeks out those who are seeking forgiveness, and Allah Ta'ala just forgives them. But there is one or two small exceptions. This hadith, same thing, it basically says something very similar. But it says there's two people that Allah does not forgive. Mushahin wa qatili nafs. Somebody who's a murderer, may Allah protect us all. But then mushahin, somebody who has hatred or enmity for others. Somebody who holds grudges. So let's briefly talk about this. That this is something that it's very easy to remove, but the implications of it are very big. And now we see other sins. We have to keep in mind, there's a principle in Arabic, al-iqtiranu fi al-nadmi yujib al-iqtiran fi al-hukm, that if two things are brought together, it shows that they're kind of similar in their level of severity. So now keep in mind, holding grudges is being brought right next to qatili nafs, somebody who killed another person. May Allah protect us. So we might think that, well, it's very bad for someone to kill, but then this is something that's not uncommon. There may be many people who have some enmity, some grudge regarding others. So this is something to keep in mind, that if we want the forgiveness of Allah Ta'ala, then we just have to let it go. So if there's anyone who's wronged us or who we just don't like, then we just let it go. Now just to sort of shed a little bit of light on this, what exactly does this mean, not to hold a grudge? What if somebody did something wrong to us? May Allah protect us. And then we think that, well, still feel kind of bad that they did that. So we have to understand that there's two levels to this. One thing is something that's within our own capacity, our own ikhtiyar. So something that's within our own capacity, our own ikhtiyar, is choosing to forgive them, choosing to not hold anything against them. And the other thing that's not always within our capacity is how we're feeling in our heart. So now regarding that, if we try to do whatever we can to forgive them, let it go, not hold it against them, but we still feel kind of bad about it in our hearts, then we hope that Allah Ta'ala will not take us to task for that, because that's something that is beyond our capacity. We try our best, but then if we tried our best and we still feel it, we still feel kind of uncomfortable, then okay, fine. But then we have to do what's in our capacity of forgiving them. Now, what does that mean, to not hold a grudge? Number one, we try to let things go. Number two, if we have any bad feelings towards them, then we definitely don't act on that impulse. We don't treat them any differently than anyone else. And then finally, we actually wish good for them. The Prophet ﷺ said in a very famous hadith in Sahih Muslim, ad-deenu nasiha, that deen is wishing good for others. What nasiha means is iradatu jami' al-khayri lil-mansuhi lahu, wishing all good for the other person. And then the hadith goes on to explain that this applies to ammatul muslimin, all people. So we try to wish good for all people, including people that we don't like so much. We don't wish bad for them, we wish good for them. If we still feel a little hurt in our hearts, try to do whatever we can to let it go, but we hope that Allah will not take us to task for that, yet we still do what's in our capacity of definitely not wishing any bad for them, wishing good for them, not acting on any bad impulses, and then we try to forgive them as well. So now, if we all have to introspect, take a moment and just say that, is there anything like this that I'm holding against anyone? If so, then tonight is the night to let it go. Because Allah Ta'ala is ready to forgive us on the condition that we let things go and we don't hold things against other people. May Allah give all of us tawfiq. So with that stated, so we understand that this night has a lot of virtue. The Prophet ﷺ would make extensive dua and pray extensively as well. We talked about this, whether they're weak narrations as well. Also, just to clarify this one thing, we hear that, we might have heard that this is the night that it is distributed, that our provision is distributed or decided. So here's a narration, it's from Kitabu Fada'il al-Awqat of Imam Bayhaqi. This is part of a larger narration. He says, فِيهَا يُكْتَبَ كُلُّ مَوْلُودٍ مِّن بَنِي آدَمْ فِي هَذِهِ السَّنَةِ وَفِيهَا يُكْتَبَ كُلُّ هَالِكٍ مِّن بَنِي آدَمْ فِي هَذِهِ السَّنَةِ. So everyone who's going to be born this year, it's documented. Anybody who's going to perish this year and die, that's also documented. So now we've probably all heard this before. Now we may think that, wait a minute, wasn't this all decided before? I thought everything was already decided. So what does it mean that it's being decided this year who's going to be born and what the provision for anybody is when, I thought that was already decided a long time ago. So in order to understand that, we have to understand that there's 5 different levels of Allah Ta'ala's predetermination, the taqdeer of Allah. The first and broadest level is the fact that Allah Ta'ala knows everything, the ilm of Allah. So Allah knows everything, so that means that Allah also knows what's going to happen in the future. Allah also knows what me and you are going to choose in every single day of our lives. Of course, Allah knows that. So now at the broadest level, that is the taqdeer of Allah, the predetermination of Allah Ta'ala, the destiny that Allah Ta'ala has already predetermined, the fact that Allah already knows things. Then after that, everything was written in Lawh al-Mahfuz. So there's a hadith, إِنَّ اللَّهَ كتب في كتاب قبل أن يخلق السماوات والأرض كتب المقادير 50,000 سنة قبل أن خلق السماوات والأرض. 50,000 years before Allah Ta'ala created everything, Allah wrote down in the Lawh al-Mahfuz. So obviously the ilm of Allah Ta'ala preceded, it came before this Lawh al-Mahfuz. Lawh al-Mahfuz itself is a creation of Allah. So this is the first level of the taqdeer of Allah, that Allah knows everything. And then there, at a certain point, Allah transcribed everything, Allah wrote everything in the Lawh al-Mahfuz, 50,000 years before everything was created. Then, after that, there's another hadith. إِنَّ أَحَدَكُمْ يُجْمَعُ خَلْقُهُ فِي بَطْنِ أُمِّهِ 40 يَوْمًا نُطْفَةً ثُمَّ يَكُونُ عَلَقَةً مِثْلَ ذَلِكَ ثُمَّ يَكُونُ مُضْغَةً مِثْلَ ذَلِكَ. That a person is formulated in the mother's womb. And it describes 40-day periods in which they're formulated in different levels of gestation. Then finally, ثُمَّ يُؤْمُرُ فَيَأْتِيهِ الْمَلَكُ وَيُؤْمُرُ بِأَرْبَعِ كَلِمَاتٍ. After 120 days, 4 months, then an angel comes to somebody when they're in their womb of their mother. The angel says, بِكَتْبِ رِزْقِهِ وَعَمَلِهِ وَأَجْلِهِ وَشَقِيٌّ أَمْ سَعِيدٌ. The angel says that what they're going to get in their life in terms of sustenance, how long they're going to live, and whether they're going to be good or bad, بِكَتْبِ رِزْقِهِ وَأَجْلِهِ وَعَمَلِهِ, his deeds, and also whether they're going to be of the people of Jannah or Jahannam. So all of us probably have heard this. We might think that, well, what's the point of this, because it was already written in Lawh al-Mahfuz. So why is it needed then to be, why is it repeated over here? Well, it makes it a lot more relevant for each and every individual, because Lawh al-Mahfuz has everybody's information all together. But now if me and you are in the womb of our mothers, may Allah Ta'ala have mercy on them all, and then now an angel comes and specifically says the stuff for me, or the stuff for you, at the time of our gestation, then it's a lot more relevant than when it's sort of with everyone else's things. For example, as a profession, I'm a teacher. If I say all the students have to make sure they turn their homework in on time, that's fine. But then if I tell one particular student, I say, hey, you make sure you turn your homework in tomorrow morning, it's a lot more relevant for that person, right? So similarly, just like it's in Lawh al-Mahfuz, then it's also sort of re-announced at the time when somebody is in the womb of their mother. And then, even though that's already announced for a person's entire life, it's more relevant as well if it's announced on a yearly basis. And according to many scholars, that's what happens on this night. Some scholars say it's divided between this night and Laylatul Qadr, whichever one it is, whether it's this one or that one, or it's a division between both, then it's reiterated on a yearly basis. So we see that there's different levels of taqdeer, and all of them basically go back to the first one, which is the knowledge of Allah, but it's sort of just reiterated at a more and more granular level, just to make it more relevant for each and every individual. So whatever is being announced was already known from before, just reiterated to make it things easy for us, or make it more real for us. So in case we have heard that this is the night that things are distributed, sustenance, then this is how it works with everything else. Now, sometimes there's some practices that some of us may have heard of, that since things are distributed this day, things are determined, then we should do specific things like read Surah Yasin 3 times, or specific salahs. As far as I know, as far as I've come across, there's none of this that's specifically mentioned in any book of hadith. So there's not any specific prescription for this night or anything like that. We'll talk about general things that we can do. So what are some general things that we can do? And we'll finish inshallah with this inshallah in just a few minutes. So something very easy, Fajr and Isha with Jamaat. So alhamdulillah, all of us prayed Isha with Jamaat. Fajr, inshallah, just in some hours, we can try to do that as well. We know that the reward of praying Isha in the Jama'ah is half of the night worship. And Fajr is also the other half of the night in worship. So we hope that inshallah, even if we can't do anything else, we at least try to do this much. May Allah Ta'ala give us tawfiq. Sleeping with wudu also very easy. Abstaining from sin doesn't take any extra time. In fact, it takes less time. So this is something that we can all do. Cleaning the heart. Also, this doesn't really take any time. It's just a matter of just a decision that we make. It's a matter of a moment. So all of these things don't really take any time. Then in terms of what we can do if we're actually allocating some time for ibadah. So now, however much time we can allocate, the better it is. This is just a simple, easy format. And now all of this, the formatting is a little bit messed up, but all of this can be done within an hour. So an hour is a probably pretty reasonable amount for anyone. We want to worship for 8 hours, and that's very good, but if we can't do that, at least this is a good start. So one thing to start with is salawat or durood on the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So we can do any form. Specifically, the one that I have, I recommend a lot. There's a book by Maulana Musa Ruhani Bazi called Al-Barakat al-Makkiyah. You can just Google it and then we'll find it, inshallah. Very easy to find. Al-Barakat al-Makkiyah. So Maulana Musa Ruhani Bazi passed away, he's buried in Lahore, passed away in 1998. When he passed away, there was a beautiful scent, fragrance that came from his grave. And it stayed there for 7 to 8 months afterwards. People even took the dirt home and then they still smelled the beautiful fragrance. So somebody saw him in a dream afterwards and said that, what is it that you did that such a beautiful scent came from your grave? He said it was this book specifically that I wrote, this book of durood, this book of salawat, barakat, makkiyah, that Allah Ta'ala really liked, Allah accepted it. So the best thing for us to do is to attach ourselves to things that we hope are accepted by Allah, things that are already pleasing to Allah. If we sort of just get ourselves in there, then we hope that Allah's pleasure can also, inshallah, extend to us as well. So we can say any form of salawat. The one specifically, the book that I like to recommend is called Al-Barakat Al-Makkiyah. We can just Google it, we'll easily be able to find it. Dhikr for just 10 minutes. We can do any amount that we want. 10 minutes is easy. And then I'll mention a very simple, easy one that we can do. Inshallah, we'll see the reward for that in just a moment or so. Quran, 10 minutes, also very easy as well. Okay, so Quran, the more that we can do, the better it is, but this is just a start. So there is a hadith that perhaps all of us have heard. يقال لصاحب القرآن اقرأ وارتقي ورتل كما كنت ترتل في الدنيا. That a person who made the Quran their friend, it will be said to him that recite and you will ascend, you will raise up as you recite. فإن منزلتك عند آخر آية تقرأها. Your station will be in the very last place, the very last ayah that you recite. So now, what does that mean, the friend of the Quran? The friend of the Quran can mean the hafiz of the Quran, but it doesn't necessarily mean that. It means somebody who takes the company of the Quran, somebody who always puts themselves in the Quran's company. That very well could be a hafiz. But maybe even if somebody is not a hafiz, then it can still apply to them. We may think that I've been trying to memorize throughout my life and it's very difficult, I haven't been able to finish. That's okay, as long as we make the Quran our friend. And now what does it mean? كَمَا كُنْتَ تُرَتِّلُ فِي الدُّنْيا. Raise up and recite and raise up, just as you used to recite in the dunya. So what some of the scholars say this means is that this is according to the amount. So if a person would recite for, let's say, 1 minute a day, then the amount that the way that they would do it in the dunya is just a little bit, so then that's how long they'll go up for. But if a person would spend long hours reciting, may Allah give all of us tawfiq, then they'll just continue raising and raising and raising. So now Quran, one part of it is reading. Another part is trying to understand it as well. Because Allah has sent down the Quran, وَأَنزَلْنَا إِلَيْكَ الذِّكْرَى لِتُبَيِّنَ لِلنَّاسِ مَا نُزِّلَ إِلَيْهِمْ وَلَعَلَّهُمْ يَتَفَكَّرُونَ. That people can reflect. So just as we spend some time reciting Quran, we should take a translation as well, or a tafsir if we have one. Just try to understand it a little bit as well. Think about it. See how we can practice it. Dua. We'll spend just a moment talking about dua, so I'll come back to this. Salat al-Tasbih. So the Salat al-Tasbih, we may have already heard of it before, so I won't go into the details. But in short, it takes about 20 minutes. There's one particular tasbih, Subhanallah, walhamdulillah, wa la ilaha illallah, wallahu akbar. Recite it 75 times in each rak'ah, 4 different rak'ahs, 300 times in total of the entire salah. We won't go into the details, but the reward is huge. Just Google it, inshallah, if we don't already remember how to do it. And it's a very easy thing to do and huge reward, inshallah, and it only takes about 20 minutes. So it would still fall within this 1 hour. So what we'll do, inshallah, just to conclude, dhikr, I'll mention one specific one, just as a suggestion, but we can do any, and then dua we'll briefly talk about it, and then we'll end, inshallah, within 5 minutes. So very briefly, we'll briefly talk about dua, then we'll do one quick dhikr. So now we may think about dua, and we may think that, I make dua, but I don't really have much to say. Maybe I make a list of all the things I need to say, but then I just run out of it. So I have a friend who, I met him after some time. He had gone for 1 year Jamaat, and then I met him, and I said, how are things for you? What's going on? He said, well, one significant change I made in my life is that I make dua for half an hour a day in a single sitting. And I said, how do you do that? Because if I make dua, then after a few minutes, I'll just run out of things to say. So how do you do it a half an hour every single day? He said, what I started to do is I started to make dua for 5 minutes. And that was my rule. I wouldn't be able to put my hands down until 5 minutes elapsed. So for example, right now the time is 9 o'clock. So the rule is that I'm going to make dua until 9:05. I'm not going to put my hands down. Now he said that I would run out of things to say maybe after 2 minutes, after 3 minutes. But then the rule I stipulated for myself is I'm going to keep my hands up until 9:05. So I would just sort of fill in the time. I would force myself to speak. And then he said, after a while, I began to be able to do dua for 5 minutes, and it was fine. So then the next week I increased it to 10 minutes. And then the next week, 15 minutes. And before I knew it, I was making dua for half an hour. And I would think that maybe 5 or 10 minutes passed, and I'd look at my watch and see that it was already a half an hour. What I realized, this is my friend talking, is that throughout the time I was developing a closer connection to Allah. We may think that, let's say that we have a friend that we haven't seen maybe in 10 years, a very good old friend. Then we see them, then we start chatting, and we look at our watch and we say, wow, it's been an hour. I didn't even realize we were talking for so long. And what if there's another person that we meet for the first time? Let's say we have to sit down with them, go out to dinner with them or something. We don't really know what to say. We say something, and then they respond, then there's a silence, awkward silence. Then they say something, and then another awkward silence. So why is it that with one person the conversation will just flow, but with the other person we won't really be able to have a conversation very well? Because there's a connection with one and not a connection with another. So we need to ask ourselves that when we make dua to Allah Ta'ala, we're speaking to Allah. So then now, is our conversation able to just flow? Or do we feel like there are awkward silences? There's pauses. So if we feel that there's pauses, that's okay. But we can use this as an opportunity to try and increase our connection with Allah, just speak to Allah, such that, inshallah, we hope that by the time Ramadan starts, then we'll just be able to make dua, and it'll just be a conversation. Allah Ta'ala talks about 3 things in Ramadan. First, Allah says, كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمُ الصِّيَامِ, fasting. Then Allah Ta'ala talks about Ramadan. Allah Ta'ala talks about the Quran. شَهْرُ رَمَضَانَ الَّذِي أُنزِلَ فِيهِ الْقُرْآنِ. But after that, Allah Ta'ala talks about dua. وَإِذَا سَأَلَكَ عِبَادِي عَنِّي فَإِنِّي قَرِيبٌ. That when my slave asks of me, indeed I am very near. So Allah Ta'ala could have said this anywhere else in the Quran. Allah specifically said it in the ayat of Ramadan to show us that just as Ramadan is the month of fasting, also the month of Quran, it's also the month of dua. Because all of the ruhaniyah that we gain through fasting, through Quran, we want to capitalize on that by using that to establish that connection with Allah. And the way that we do that is by speaking to Allah Ta'ala through dua. So now, given that we still have 2 weeks left, and Allah has given us a very special opportunity tonight, then tonight is the night of dua. Just it's the night of prayer, it's also the night of dua. So it's a time for us to just pour our hearts out to Allah Ta'ala and just try to speak to Allah Ta'ala whatever we can. It's not just about making a list. There's 2 parts of dua. There's a part where we ask, that's the smaller part. The bigger part is the build-up, just speaking to Allah. Allah Ta'ala says, ذِكْرُ رَحْمَةِ رَبِّكَ عَبَدَهُ زَكَرِيَّا إذ نادى ربه نداء خفيا. The dua of Zakaria alayhi salam, قال ربي إني وهن العظم مني. My bones have grown feeble. واشتعل الرأس شيبا. My hair has grown white. ولم أكن بدعائك ربي شقيا. And I'll never give up hope in making dua to you. وإني خفت الموالي من ورائي. I fear for my heirs after me. وكانت امرأتي عاقرا. My wife is barren. فهب لي من لدنك وليا. So grant me a successor. So we see that most of his dua was just talking, only as humbling himself before Allah. Just a small part was actually asking. So if we make dua and we focus on the build-up, the conversation part of it, humbling ourselves, just talking to Allah, then we won't think that I ran out of things to say, because I ran out of everything I need to ask for, because that's the smaller part. The bigger part is just talking to Allah Ta'ala. So we see that this is a very simple, easy thing to do. Salawat, 10 minutes. Dhikr, 10 minutes. Quran, 10 minutes. We can, of course, increase it too. That's 30 minutes. Dua, 10 minutes. 40 minutes. Salat al-Tasbih, 20 minutes. We have an hour. That's not very long. And inshallah, that's a very comprehensive thing to do. Just as I said, very quickly, just to end with this, just one narration that we can see regarding a specific dhikr that we can do. So, here we go. Okay. The Prophet ﷺ said, whoever says, La ilaha illallah, let's all say it together, La ilaha illallah, wahdahu, la sharika lahu, lahul mulku, wa lahul hamdu, wa huwa ala kulli shay'in qadir. Okay, many of us are already familiar with it, but the hadith says, this is in Bukhari, whoever says this 100 times, then he will get the reward of freeing 10 slaves, 100 good deeds will be written for him, 100 bad deeds will be erased, he'll be protected from shaitan on that day until the evening, and no one will be able to bring anything better on the Day of Judgment except somebody who did more than that. So there's a lot of different dhikrs that we can do. This is one very easy, comprehensive one. So saying it 100 times will definitely take less than 10 minutes. I put 10 minutes there just as, just a buffer. But then this is a very easy thing to say that many of us may be familiar with already. The hadith is authentic and the reward for it is huge. So on this night, we try to do as much as we can. But if we can seek out deeds that are relatively small but have huge implications, then we hope, inshallah, we hope that we can maximize reward. We ask Allah Ta'ala give us tawfiq to take advantage of this night, inshallah. We ask Allah Ta'ala allow us to let go of any grudges such that we're not held back from the forgiveness of Allah Ta'ala. We ask Allah Ta'ala, inshallah, allow us to maximize on this night and come to Ramadan, inshallah, extremely well prepared, and that Allah allow us to maximize on Ramadan. May Allah Ta'ala accept from us all. Wa sallallahu ala nabi al-kareem. Jazakumullah khairan.
Jazakumullah khairan. Once again, inshallah, Salatul Fajr is at 6:15, inshallah, for those of us, all of us trying to make a point to come to the masjid tomorrow, 6:15, inshallah.